Hey there, everybody. PTPOP here with all four lobes of my brain engulfed in Beatlemania. Today is a great show. Today, welcome to my show. And today we're going to take a deep dive into one of the most iconic cultural phenomenons of the 20th century, Beatlemania.
Would you like fries with that?
Now, in this video, I'm not just looking at the Beatles' music, but I'm looking at the larger social and political impact that the band had on a world in complete flux. While millions of fans saw them as revolutionary artists and just four good guys from Great Britain, others viewed their rise with a lot of skepticism and even fear. One such skeptic was David A. Noble, who, in his controversial article, Communism, Hypnotism, and the Beatles, he painted the band as part of a larger plot to influence and control the minds of the youth in Western culture. But was Beatlemania just a harmless cultural wave, or could there have been a deeper agenda at play? Now, you might be saying to yourself, why are you talking to me about the Beatles? Well, I might not have gone to school and studied sociology or psychology. I have not gone to school and got my master's degree or doctorate degree in the influence of the Beatles on culture, but I was part of it because when I was a little kid in 1974, I was 8 years old, and I discovered the Beatles. And I became completely and utterly, hopelessly obsessed with the Beatles. I was engulfed in Beatlemania, and Beatlemania hadn't even been a thing since 1966. So this is almost 10 years later. They hadn't been a band since 1970, so they've been broken up for 4 years. But I heard their music, saw a tape of them on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I was obsessed, completely out of my mind with the Beatles. So I talked about it, so I thought about. I'd run home from school and play my Beatle records, listen to them on the weekends. I tried to get everybody to listen to them. I begged my parents to buy me records, and when I finally got money, I bought my own records. That's all I lived for. But I wanted to know why. Why did this band affect me so much? Why did they have such a hold on me? And why did they have such a grasp on the world? Now, for those of you that are too young and may not be into the Beatles had a worldwide reaction. People either loved them or hate them, but more people hated them, loved them. They were a household name. They were the first rock group in history to have such worldwide attention and fame and popularity. It was a massive phenomenon. And I asked myself, why? Why is this happening? Why did it happen? And why is this still happening to this day? Now, in order for us to really try to answer that question, I've got to try to explain to you what the culture, at least in the United States, was like back in the 1950s and 1960s. Now, believe it or not, before the Beatles, before Elvis, there were screaming girls. And the girls came and they screamed, they yelled and shouted for a guy named Frank Sinatra. And Frank Sinatra was a guy who my mother told me about. My mom would say, well, there's nothing new there. The girls screaming with the Beatles is nothing new. They used to scream for Sinatra. All the Bobby Soxers would scream for Sinatra. And I'd say, oh, what are you talking about, Mom? You don't know what you're talking about. Sinatra's nothing as good as the Beatles, And I would get in these arguments. She'd say, okay, well, and then the documentary came out one day. And there were the Bobby Soxers documentary about Sinatra. And I found this stuff on the internet here. This is Frank Sinatra live, I think in New York City or something. These are all the Bobby Soxers. These are all the girls. They're out there. See, there's their Bobby Soxers. Let's get their Bobby Soxers on there. Sexy little Bobby Soxers. I'm sure some guys, you guys out there have a fetish for those shoes. But it does nothing for me. But Sinatra had the screaming, fainting girls. But they were more conserved, they were more reserved than Elvis and Beatles fans. And this was a time in our lives where in this country, it was post-World War II, there was a huge industrial boom. There was what's called the nuclear family, where the father was the head of the household, the mother stayed at home, took care of the kids. The American dream was born. You're supposed to have the 2.5 kids, a golden retriever, a little cozy bungalow in the middle of the suburbs, and everything was peachy keen. Dad would get up and go to work. The kids would go to school. The mom would stay home and cook and clean and live the life of luxury. While men were given certain roles, women were given certain roles. The civil rights movement hadn't come along yet. The feminist movement hadn't come along. Women's rights hadn't been seen. So women were solely restricted to being homemakers or housewives, as they were called back then. And black people and white people in the United States were segregated. It was a very different time. So these are the girls that would come. It was just like a Beatles fan or an Elvis event. But look how conservative and nicely dressed they are. They've got nice hats, nice coats, nice pocketbooks. They're done up. They look good. And they're happy. They're smiling. There's no tattoos. There's no, that stuff they do now at the concerts. The devil is cool, man. You're not going to see that from these ladies. And it's like 99% women. And look, one thing once you notice in all these women, look how skinny they are. Nice looking women, nice shapes, well dressed. Today's concert, you got the girls with the belly sticking out, tattoo on their belly, a belly ring. I'm fat. I love Burger King and beer and Marlboro Reds. Culture's changed quite a bit since these ladies came around. So you've got, here's Frankie, here's Sinatra, and he's up on stage. And look at compared to what you got today on stage. Look what he comes out all dressed up. He's got a nice, long coat on. His hair is done nice. He's slender. He's well groomed. Real musicians playing behind him, brass musicians, and the girls are going crazy. And he was known as a crooner. So now you've got Elvis coming up here. These are the Sinatra girls. Now Elvis, these girls go crazy. Just because he's shaking, rattling, rolling, rock and roll on stage. Crying, screaming, wetting their pants, the whole thing. I'm not being facetious. This is what the girls did. Now think about this. This is 1950s. This is post-war America, where you're not supposed to act like that. You're not supposed to gyrate and shake your hips. It was considered evil, and Elvis was filled with the devil, and it was considered to be pretty controversial and counterculture. And to see your young ladies, your daughters, your sisters acting in such irreverent ways was considered dirty and filthy. And it was a very controversial thing what Elvis did. His moves on the stage, when he appeared on Ed Sullivan, they would only show him from the waist up. The camera frame was only from the waist up, so the audience couldn't see his hips swiveling around. But then you had the Beatles. Now the Beatles come along to America in February of 1964. And this is like a little newsreel here. This is Uproar Greets Their Return Home. Now this is, I believe this is from Universal International News. And I think this is after the Beatles appeared on Ed Sullivan, I think. And this is their greeting back home. Let me turn this down because it gets kind of noisy.
The velvet cloak of night shrouds the London airport.
A velvet cloak of night shrouds the London airport. Well, people don't talk like, nobody's poetic anymore. I mean, there's rap music which is poetic, but it's very like beat you over the head with your words. There's nothing soft or, it's creative, but it's very belligerent and in your face. But look at this, they're going to say these girls were all sleeping overnight to see the Beatles.
All is quiet, all is serene.
All is quiet, all is serene, all of us teenagers are just laying on each other in the middle of a coliseum.
But this is the lull before the storm. Thousands of
boys, too. Nowadays, if you saw that, you would think they were all gay, wouldn't you? This is newsreel footage that would have been shown, like, before a movie. Like today, if the few movie theaters are left, but those of you that are old enough to remember, before the movies would show on the big screen in the theaters, when you got in your car and drove down the street to go to the movies, they show previews. And this would be something they would have shown in a theater, and it was strictly designed and marketed to promote the Beatles and create hysteria around the Beatles. Because listen to music. The music's upbeat, fast tempo, in a major key, stimulates the brain, gets you excited, gets your heartbeat going.
Like a teenage scream, the arrival of the froggy-voiced foursome is
The froggy voice foursome, peace and love.
imminent. The cries of the crowd grow in pitch and volume, drowning out the whine of the
Look at the jet clipper Beatles, huh?
jet engine.
No, okay, so the Beatles are coming back from America for the first time, right? They're on Ed Sullivan. They've hit it big out in New York and across the country. Like, I think 50 to 60 million people watched that concert. They only played like 4 songs or something, maybe 6 songs. Where did they get the idea to put the name of the band on the jet aircraft? I mean, they didn't know that was going to be a success, and they were fairly famous in London and in England by this time, but isn't it kind of odd that they stenciled the name of the band on the jet? That's interesting. Now, there's like 16,000 kids here with banners screaming their heads off, all for a rock band, all just for 4 guys to play guitar and drums.
And here they are.
And here they are.
Fresh from their triumphant appearances in the United States. 12,000.
Yeah, what I don't understand about the Beatles, even when I was a kid, and I didn't know about girls and boys and the birds and the bees, I saw the Beatles and I was like, they're kind of odd looking guys. I remember those weren't my words as a kid, but I thought they were kind of ugly. You know, they look kind of like goofy, ugly. They don't look like Sinatra. They ain't good looking like Elvis. And Elvis could sing, man. Elvis and Sinatra's not a good singer, but Elvis had it all. He was a complete package. But I look at these guys and I'm like, what? You know,
Young Britons roar a welcome. Their shrieks rise in an awesome wave. Our staff scientist, in an odd moment, calculated that this young mob is generating enough energy to put 3 Atlas missiles in orbit and power 54,000 transistor radios.
What? They had scientists analyzing this to see how many transistor radios the energy created by the Screaming Girls would power? All right, so let's analyze that, because they obviously didn't analyze that on the fly, and there was no internet back then. So I guess in post, after they filmed it and the Beatles came back, they rung up the British scientific community and said, hey, could you tell me how much energy was generated here and how many transistor radios it would power on? This thing's kind of odd. It's an odd statement. And why would a scientist in any country waste their time with such calculations? But it's just another way to hype up the energy. It's all about the energy of the Screaming Girls, the large masses, the hysterical and overly hyped propaganda and words they use is pretty intense and weird. I mean, they're really kind of goofy looking guys. John looks like he hasn't slept in a week. I don't know. Ringo's got that big honker, and George, I always thought George was the best looking one of the 4, but I thought Paul was kind of an odd looking guy with that roundish, boyish face. I couldn't stand his face.
Some of the fences hold, others do not. A minor...
I mean, look at that. I mean, look at the hysteria. Okay? Look at these girls. It's like they're caged animals. It's like they're losing their minds. They've lost their minds. They're hysterical. They're throwing all caution to the wind. And you know, let me ask you this: what could they possibly want? What do they want with these Beatles? If the fence came down, and let's just say one girl could get through, does she want one of the Beatles to have their way with her? What do they want? Do they know what they even want? You know, I mean, what could you possibly give them to satiate this passion, this frantic craziness, this hysteria? None of those 4 guys could do anything to make these girls happy. And can you imagine the the letdown. You know, you've got this big crush. You're turned on by these guys. Maybe you're of the sexual age and you have a sexual attraction to them, and you get to meet them and you find out they're just in person, just like, they're not that much. They're not that romantic as you think. They're not as witty in person. That they're very shy and withdrawn. They don't want anything to do with you because you're a fat cow that, that they're not attracted to. Can you imagine how devastating that would be if you really got to meet one and they didn't like you? And they probably wouldn't. Most of these chicks are like 14 years old. That doesn't mean they weren't banging 14-year-olds. You know that. I mean, I'm sure they just weren't sitting around drinking rum and coke and smoking Peter Stuyvesant cigarettes in hotel rooms. You can bet your sweet bippy on that.
The miracle is mounted by the fact that there are no injuries spread among the...
John's humor. That's funny, John. And people thought that was hysterical back then. Oh, John made a funny face. It's so hysterical.
Near hysterical crowd.
Near hysterical. It's completely hysterical. And keep in mind, we weren't there. And none of us were in England, in America. None of us were over there. So for all we know, we don't know where these shots came from. I mean, I just take it at face value that these are actually girls that were there to see the Beatles when they came back from tour. But could this be another scene that they edited in to make the Beatles look more exciting than they really were? I'm just saying, you can do anything in post.
Is a social document for our time.
It's a social document for our time, I think he says.
Hysterical crowd. This truly is a social document for our time.
A social document for our time. It's very profound. And if you notice, these girls aren't looking at the camera. I know they're trying to get the attention of the Beatles. But they're all looking like the camera's right up on them. I'm assuming he's just sitting there right there on a tripod with it right in their face. They're not even looking at them. And most people will look at the camera if they know there's a camera there. Unless they're told not to look at it. And I just know this from being a photographer and you're doing video. You're not supposed to look into the camera unless you're... Especially if... Well, anyway, they're not supposed to be looking into the camera, so it's almost like somebody directed them to look away. I know the Fab Four is off in the distance, but...
This truly is a social document for our time.
And notice that throughout this entire newsreel, you've got music with blaring saxophone and drums and bass. And you got the screaming girls, and it's edited in a quick fashion, and then they bring in the slow stuff to create a hysterical visual element too. So it's, as you're watching this, as you're a kid in London, you didn't get to go to the airport, but you're in the theater, and you're about to watch, The Sound of Music or something on the big screen, or whatever was out in 1964. And this comes on, you're like, oh my God, who are the Beatles? Oh my God, I better go see them. And if you're a girl, you're like, oh my God, you start to get all excited, your heart starts to race, you feel like screaming. And it's a way of conditioning you, as this is how you're supposed to act when you hear the Beatles, when you see the Beatles, when you read about the Beatles. And this wasn't just a one-time thing. This happened everywhere. And the rumor is that for the Beatles' appearance on Ed Sullivan, that Brian Epstein went off into the audience or out to the line of girls like we saw at Sinatra. They were lined up outside of CBS Studios. And he paid girls like $50 to go into the auditorium and scream their asses off. So some of that was manufactured, they say.
40 young ladies fainted, but authorities feel that some were playing possum, so that they might be lifted over the fence and thus be nearer their idols.
I mean, look at these chicks. They passed out. They're screaming, and now here comes the Beatles. Now, this is a weird scene. Here comes the Beatles. I don't know where they're coming from. I guess they're going to their limousine from the plane. At least that's what you're led to believe. It looked to me like they're coming out of a building. Maybe they went and got their bags or something. I don't know. but they're surrounded by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 police officers. And it doesn't really look like, and they're mostly surrounded by their own people. Mal Evans is probably there. I don't know if Brian Epstein is there, but they're really not being hoarded by anyone. They're hoarded by their own people, but they're making it look like they're being attacked. It gives the impression they're being attacked by a mob of people, but it's really, look at that, it's all police. Look, you got a police, you got a Bobby here, Bobby. I don't even know if this is the same shot, but it's all press corps. These are not people trying to hurt them or get to them. I don't know who that is there. There's a girl here, a guy with a Beatle wig on there. And you notice how they only make that like a second? How long is this clip here? This goes from 3:01, 3 seconds, 3-second rule in editing. So 3 seconds there, now they show the crowd standing up, making a big pile of people. And as far as we know, these are people that were really at the airport, but we don't know. And look how nice, look how skinny everyone is, even in the 60s. Well dressed, she's got a fur coat on, lipstick, everybody's hair is nice. Where did all these people come from if they're all gated off? There's a big fence around the limousine. I don't understand where these people came from. It almost looks like their own people are crushing them, and the cops are crushing them. This down here looks like press people. These are not fans. It's almost like it's manufactured. They're trying to make it look hysterical and crazy. Where are the Beatles? Is that a Beatle and that's a Beatle? I think that's John. That's Ringo. No, that's Paul. George, where's Ringo? He's probably down under the bottom. Probably so small he got smooshed. It's weird. I get the door open. There goes John. There goes Paul. There's George. Where the hell is Ringo? So these are funny videos here of girls being interviewed, and I've seen these interviews for years and years and years. These are very popular.
And then they don't even let you say them. I got every.
Let me see them. I mean, these girls are just they don't even know what they want. You know, they're completely out of their minds, and they don't even know what they want. Now, this guy, I've seen this guy for years and years and years. He's like, he's kind of like. He's got about as much wits about him as a bag of rocks. Got every Beatle record.
Beatle record at home. Every Beatle record. We didn't get the.
I got every Beatle record.
I got every Beatle record at home.
I got every Beatle record. And the guy behind him with the glasses goes, oh. I mean, these guys, I got every Beatle record. Like that's, back then there's like 1, 2 records.
Beatle record. We didn't get.
I don't know. That's another thing he says. I got every Beatle record, and this is 1964. They had introduced the Beatles in America, but in England, they had Please Please Me, and With the Beatles. Is that what it was? Yeah, Please Please Me and With the Beatles. This is 64, and Beatles for Sale hadn't come out yet. Maybe he means 45s. Maybe he's got all their singles.
What kind of police protection? Yeah.
What does he want? Does he want everybody to go up and jump on him? What do these people want? They don't even know what they want. But think about what's being created here. The hysteria that's created by the editing, that's created by the music, that's created by the atmosphere, by the interviews. Crying, sobbing, anger, resentment that there's police protection to keep them from their idols. And you've got to sit and go, what is going on here? What's happened to these people? What's come over them? Now this is later on. I think this is another year. This is, I think, 66 at Candlestick Park. And I was just thinking about this. So back then the microphones have been pretty good for a long time, but this is a run and gun situation. What kind of microphones could they have on a camera crew to capture screaming? Do you know how hard it would be to get their levels right? Screaming, hundreds, thousands of girls in the street. So could these screaming girls been put in post? Because I don't know how they would have gotten a decent recording of it back then. So now the Beatles come to the window to say hi and taunt them and everything. But look, it's very strange. It's showing a girl. Now this looks phony to me. Look as she's taking her away, and she opens her eyes and looks at the camera. Like, okay, are you rolling? Oh, I'm gonna pretend I'm oh, Paul.
You officers that are stationed in front of the stage behind the barricade.
Look at Ringo. Shake my head like a beetle. Shake my head like a beetle. Why are they putting on makeup? They put on makeup for those horrible little 20-minute concerts?
Behind the barricade.
Oh, this must be Shea Stadium. I think this is Shea Stadium.
You will go to Mr. Morris Shapiro, the first aid man.
They're carrying girls over the fence.
And he will furnish you with earplugs so as to keep you from having a headache. If he runs out of earplugs, he has got some cotton.
This guy right here with the sunglasses.
Out of earplugs, he has got some.
I wouldn't want to mess with this dude. He's Klan all the way, you know.
Cotton. You can use.
Well, I'm gonna make that a meme. A Hollywood Bowl concert. This is 64 and 65, I guess.
Going Sunday, we just see the reaction of the audience. I think that's even more important, I think.
I can't remember his name. He's a famous actor from, damn, I can never remember his name.
And they made two great pictures.
Jack Benny. So what they're doing here, now I don't know, I think this might be a conglomeration of newsreel footage from over the years. It's got to be a conglomeration. But here, they're using established celebrities of the time, Jack Benny, soon it'd be Groucho Marx, to legitimize the Beatles. So they're using big names that are kind of sort of condoning the Beatles and giving them their thumbs up. And it puts in the viewer's mind that, hey, the Beatles must be good, especially if you're from the older generation, the World War II generation, and you're watching this and you think it's baloney. Oh, Jack Benny likes him. He's going to go see him. You know, Groucho Marx is there. Wow. They must be pretty good. So it's a way of conditioning and manipulating the viewer into thinking that the Beatles are all that, especially for those that were questioning it from the older generation.
So I guess they're great. What do you?
I guess they're great. That's funny. I love this.
And they made two great pictures.
So this must be post 65 or up to 65 to 66. They made two great pictures. And that's debatable. A Hard Day's Night was pretty good. Help, I guess they were all right movies, but... So he says they made two great pictures.
So I guess they're great. What do you want?
I guess they're great. Now, if you don't know Groucho Marx, he was a comedian. Very famous comedian and very funny guy. And they're asking him what he thinks of the Beatles.
Well, what are you going to do in there, Groucho? Are you going in to listen to Beatles music?
I'm going in and get drunk.
I'm going in to get drunk. Is that an elephant in your pants? Or you just happy to see the Beatles?
You wouldn't dare. Are you really?
Of course I am.
Brought the charming family with you?
Whenever I can get a free drink, I'll go anywhere.
You bet your life.
That's a very funny answer.
So, the conditioning has begun, okay? So this didn't happen overnight. This is where you've got to understand that the popular narrative of the Beatles, the popular narrative is they were just 4 working class kids from Liverpool that were struggling to make it as a band, okay? And they just happened to stumble upon Brian Epstein, or Brian Epstein stumbled upon them, and they got a recording contract and lived happily ever after. And, you know, back then there was no internet. Back then there was no way to really track down what they were really like, or find their tweets, or see what they were saying on Facebook. They didn't really have that kind of, they didn't have anything like that back then. There were tabloids that printed things about them, but this was, you've got to understand, this is a band that nobody had heard of in the world ever. And they had released a couple of songs in America prior to She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand. I think She Loves You was released, and it didn't do anything. And they had released, I think, Love Me Do in America, and it didn't go any higher than like 117 out of the top 200. Nobody was interested. The DJs didn't like him. Nobody liked their sound. But then they hit Ed Sullivan, and for some reason it went berserk. Everybody went crazy and ran out and started buying Beatle records. So they somehow got popular. Girls were screaming over them, chasing after them. And I'm still trying to figure out, and I'm working on figuring out why and how this happened. And the Beatles, you know, I like some of their music still. I don't like all of it. I used to love every single thing they did. There was nothing that they could do that was wrong. So we've got to ask ourselves, why do people like the Beatles? No, as I had said at the beginning, there's a document called Communism, Hypnotism, and the Beatles by David A. Noble. And I'm going to cover this document in part 2 of this. This is going to be part 1, and part 2 is going to cover some of the theories, the potential theories from this document as to why and how the Beatles came about and how they became so popular. So I appreciate you watching. I'm PTPOP. Auf Wiedersehen, baby. Have a good night. Bye.
Would you like fries with that? Would you like fries with that?